What's going on, everyone? It's your boy Savvy, and welcome back to the Savvy Show. And in today's episode, this SCP does look like a juicy one, guys. On the thumbnail, there's literally the Plague Doctor and the Shy Guy spinning around in what seems to be this SCP. This is SCP-001, the Spiral Path. So, man, to be honest, I would think that it might be just some type of portal or another dimension itself, or something that might be able to suck in other SCPs like what it seemed like on the thumbnail. Have no idea what to expect in this SCP, but obviously it's a SCP-001, another proposal, so usually they're all spicy, so I can't wait to dive deep. So with that being said, if you guys are excited for this reaction, please remember to smash that like button, smash that sub button, and also hit that bell so you can stay plugged for each and every upload. And also let me know in the comment section below what you guys thought about this SCP, because I have no idea what to expect. So with that all out the way, let's get this show started. Alrighty, SCP-001, the Spiral Path.
What is the most dangerous creature in the universe? Here on planet Earth, there are creatures that have hardly evolved since prehistoric eras, like sharks, crocodiles, and snakes. Perfect biological killing machines. But then again, the animal kingdom is nothing when compared to the menagerie of creatures contained by the SCP Foundation. So once again, what is the most dangerous creature in the universe? Is it SCP-682? The damage-regenerating reptile with a hatred for all other forms of life?
I wouldn't know.
Or is it the Scarlet King? Or is the Broken God more deserving of that title? Maybe the answer still lies elsewhere. And thankfully, there is one SCP in the Foundation's archives that might not be the most dangerous itself, but teaches us a very important lesson about what the most dangerous entity truly is. This is the story of SCP-001, the Spiral Path. An important distinction before we go any further. SCP-001 doesn't refer to a single creature, object, or entity, but rather a collection of various anomalies contained by the SCP Foundation. It is unclear why there are multiple files collected under the shared designation of SCP-001. Some believe these anomalies are some of the earliest ever contained by the Foundation, encountered before they introduced their current numbering system. There is also the theory that this is intentional misdirection, that the multiple SCP-001 files are an attempt by the Foundation to conceal secret information about the true SCP-001. Anomalies sharing the name SCP-001 include the infamous aforementioned Scarlet King, a powerful eldritch being intent on ending all creation. Another anomalous being with similar levels of destructive power is the Gate Guardian, believed to be an angel standing at the entrance to the Garden of Eden.
This seems similar to something that I might have covered or seen before. Seems like this is just a file of all the other SCP proposals of 001, obviously. What the heck?
It too goes by the name SCP-001. But for the purposes of this video, we will be using SCP-001 to refer to something otherwise codenamed the Spiral Path.
Okay.
And while it is not a creature in and of itself, SCP-001 does yield one answer to that important question. What is the most dangerous creature in the universe? On paper, SCP-001 does not seem to be much, and it certainly doesn't appear to be any sort of threat. As its nickname suggests, the Spiral Path is exactly that, located deep in a wooded area known only as Site-0. SCP-001 is a gravel path in the shape of a spiral. Your first thought at hearing that might be, what could be so important about a path? If someone were to find themselves walking along the Spiral Path, traveling clockwise around the gravel, then they will find that nothing happens. It's just a normal path with slight inclines and declines as one traverses it. If one should walk counterclockwise around it though, then they will begin to experience SCP-001's first anomalous effect. The path will begin to feel as if it is sloping uphill, getting steeper and steeper. When they reach the beginning of the path again, a person will still feel as if they are walking endlessly uphill. All the while, the path itself does not move or change in form or altitude. To put it simply, walking one way around SCP-001 causes it to behave normally. Walking the other, the path does not adhere to the laws of physics. You may well be thinking, is that all? On a surface level, the Spiral Path does appear to just be an unmoving, low-threat anomaly. While it may not be as aggressive or
On surface
malicious
level.
as some of the SCP Foundation's rogues gallery, it is still a spatial anomaly that defies all Euclidean geometry. That might sound like small potatoes when compared to everything the SCP Foundation has faced over the years, but bear in mind, if the spiral path is truly SCP-001, and the very first anomaly that the Foundation learned of, then a simple path that ignores the ordinary laws of space and time would have been a major discovery in the organization's earliest days.
It's definitely not, obviously. Like, all proposals have some sort of claim as being the first SCP, but, you know.
But why would they still keep the spiral path so heavily guarded all these years later? SCP-001 is kept behind a maximum security fence that has been constructed all the way around the perimeter of Site-0. At all times, the SCP Foundation keeps no less than 5 fully armed members of security personnel on site to keep watch over the spiral path.
Where did she
and
come
to
from?
make sure that no one approaches it who isn't authorized to.
Damn,
There is a
bless you.
small metal plaque too, bearing an unknown inscription on it. Special containment procedures for SCP-001 state that this plaque is to be kept in good condition, and it should be immediately reported if it shows any signs of damage.
Uh-oh.
A Foundation physics laboratory is also located nearby, where research staff tirelessly conducts scientific tests on SCP-001 and its anomalous properties. So there's definitely something more to the spiral path than a simple stroll around it would tell you.
I would hope so.
Attached to SCP-001's file is an item
05?
referred to as Document 001-05, written by high-ranking Foundation researcher Dr. Everett Mann. Any prospective or new members of the 05 Council are required to read this document, and from the events it details, learn the truth. Not just about the truth of the spiral path, but the truth about the SCP Foundation itself. Dr. Mann begins this file by explaining to the reader that either he or one of the original founders of the SCP Foundation must have died, and the person reading has been appointed as a successor. Whether his death was caused by an SCP, an operative from another anomalous organization like the Global Occult Coalition, or getting a little close to the flame, Mann states that old age definitely wouldn't be what killed him. He writes,
What?
"We took care of that, didn't we?" Whether he means that he and the rest of the old guard are somehow immortal, or just working for the Foundation would likely mean dying before reaching old age, is unclear.
How is the spiral path tied to the secrets of the SCP Foundation? That's what I'm still confused about. And I really hope there's more to this SCP. I know they're alluding to that, but bro, it's pretty underwhelming right now.
But Dr. Mann's next statement is one that changes the very way we view the Foundation and its entire purpose. We have never discovered an SCP in the entire history of the Foundation. According to Document 001-05, every instance of an anomalous creature, entity, or object is entirely staged. He then goes on to describe Aaron Siegel, a gifted physicist that Dr. Mann regarded very highly.
Staged?
I believe his name would be there with Edison, Einstein, and Hawking. I knew him very well. He was, and may still be, my brother. The pair evidently shared a close personal connection, and it was Siegel who first discovered SCP-001. During a hike, Aaron stumbled upon the spiral path, noticing that no matter how far uphill he seemed to travel, his elevation never once changed, only for him to end up back at the start of the path. Being a physicist, Siegel quickly realized how this unassuming gravel path did not conform to Euclidean geometry, that it did not fit within the laws of nature. Constructing a small wooden shack nearby, Aaron Siegel began to study the properties of the spiral path. Equation after equation, hours spent examining every variable and experimenting with his findings, until something unforeseen happened. Aaron created an SCP, a key that had the innate ability to open any lock. Nowadays,
Wow.
that same key is still in the Foundation's possession, under the designation
05.
SCP-005. Slowly, Aaron began to bring others into the
How do you
fold,
just make that,
trusted
though?
colleagues and other scientific minds. Among them was, of course, Dr. Everett Mann, who was still a medical student at Harvard at the time. This brain trust, a think tank composed of only a select few, they were the very beginning, the ones who founded the SCP Foundation. Using their own fortunes and funding from Thomas Carter, the group continued with Siegel's experiments. The scientists had high hopes for what they could achieve, planning to change the world for the better, feeding the hungry, providing shelter to the homeless, curing the sick, and even cheating death itself.
Wow.
In the beginning, this proto-foundation started small. Their goals were noble, but could not realistically be achieved overnight. They tried to make items that would improve life, such as the Fountain of Youth, a partially sentient Civil War statue, and an extremely bouncy ball. Better known to the Foundation today as
How are they just
SCP-006,
making all this stuff, though?
SCP-011, and SCP-018 respectively. But then this new Foundation began to grow, with more organization and a secret facility. And with that expansion came emboldened scientists, eager to change the world.
Okay, so like, I know they're all smart, like the smartest people in the world they're trying to allude to, but like it's hard to believe it's only scientific stuff that they're making these SCPs, if they actually are. And them saying that every SCP is staged, like are they just fake in a fake reality?
The group began working on human test subjects, volunteers, and drifters that soon became SCPs. The spiral path was not just a break in the fabric of reality. In a metaphorical sense, it referred to the spiraling path the newly formed Foundation itself was on. Every discovery they made led to another, and that to another still, until things started to go wrong. During the continuing experiments, Dr. Mann created SCP-008, a deadly zombie plague capable of infecting anyone with 100% lethality. More and more of the founders were so invested in their projects that the results were often nightmarish.
What?
The Foundation needed help. That came when Thomas Carter showed their work to the military in exchange for additional funding and personnel. The SCP Foundation expanded even further, becoming an international organization and bringing in new researchers and staff.
It's kind of cool that this story is actually tying SCPs that are like early on, like, you know, SCP 2, 3, 4. Like these are like earlier SCPs that makes it more believable that this was the first SCP, but like every proposal, they have their own different canon. But this one, if this was like a universal canon, it would make sense because the SCP digits of the ones that are early on are, you know, are somewhat accurate.
In some instances, the founders would arrange for the anomalies they had created to be found by the new recruits. Other times they would fabricate reports, changing the details of how things like SCP-008 or the Fountain of Youth were first discovered. Anything the founders said was simply now a fact. No one questioned them. Even then, problems still arose. Founding members broke away from the SCP Foundation, some even creating splinter groups that would later become infamous groups of interest.
That makes sense. So when they said staged, it didn't mean that the SCPs are actually fake. It's talking about their origins, where they actually came from. That is staged, because whatever the founder says is what's true now. So I think they're trying to tell us that they are the ones making all these SCPs, which is kind of weird because the whole purpose is to contain these SCPs. But if these SCPs are coming from in-house, like they're creating it, then it really does seem like they're just going around in a circle, like no pun intended, maybe like a spiral, that which would make sense because it starts from the SCP Foundation and it ends at the SCP Foundation. I really want to know their purpose because that wouldn't make any sense.
The Foundation's directive shifted, now focusing on the containment of anomalies as yet more were created through darker means. SCP-231 was taken from an orphanage. Dr. Mann himself vivisected a small boy, who then became SCP-610, the flesh that hates. And there were more still. Abel, the blood pond, and even the hard-to-destroy reptile. All of them were the creation of the Foundation itself.
Wow.
But through it all, Dr. Mann wrote, he was never afraid of the path that the Foundation was on. He was never even afraid of all the monsters and abominations that he and the other founders had secretly created by studying SCP-001. What truly scared him were the anomalies the Foundation didn't create. There were some that would just appear in containment one day, even if they hadn't been there before. They would seem like they had always been there. Dr. Mann closes document 001-05 with the realization that he and the other founders simply were not in control anymore. The tale of Dr. Mann and the other founders of the SCP Foundation is one of noble intentions that ultimately became corrupted. At first, the founders created SCPs that they hoped would benefit humanity, but then came the mistakes, the accidents, the monsters, like SCP-008, SCP-610, and even SCP-682. The Foundation lied to the governments and militaries of the world, claiming they'd found these SCPs, not created
Lied
them.
to all of us.
And in return, they received funding and staff to expand, allowing the SCP Foundation to grow to become what it is today. Dr. Mann posits that at this point, the Foundation was no longer in control, but perhaps they never were. And all of this stems back from one singular starting point, the spiral path. It might be impossible to truly know how many anomalies and SCPs the Foundation created just from researching SCP-001. Only the O5 Council will ever know exactly how many of the Founders' discoveries they themselves were responsible for.
It still doesn't make... There's so many plot holes with this canon. It seems really cool on surface level, but just studying this SCP, the Spiral Path, it doesn't seem like a very convoluted SCP for you to get more motivation or like insight to build more complicated SCPs than the one that you're finding inspiration from. From what they're saying, like it seems like it all started with this SCP, but how? Besides it just potentially being the first, and then them just creating stuff after this one, you know?
And now you know the answer to what's the most dangerous creature in the universe. It's regular people, dabbling with something they could never hope to fully understand. Starting with the hope to change the world, only to create monsters that might one day destroy it. Now go check out...
This was cool though. This was a good one, to be honest. I liked it a lot. It just didn't follow through with like it actually being... It was like a reach. It was a big reach compared to all the other proposals. It being the creation of all the SCPs in the Foundation and making it like an endless cycle. You know, making an SCP, putting it out there, capturing it, bringing it in, getting more funding, growing bigger and bigger until they are what they are today. That does seem smart and cool on surface level, but there's certain holes, like, for example, the Spiral Path. That wasn't created from the Foundation at all. And other SCPs, like the Plague Doctor, just appearing out of nowhere. Like, how did they really get out of control? I know the animation doesn't really cover everything in the file, but those are just some of the plot holes that I've seen. There's a few more, but those are just the ones I've seen in this animation. Let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this SCP. It's really more, it's a little bit more interesting compared to some of the other proposals from what they're actually trying to claim. And it's always cool to, you know, debate and discuss about certain things that revolves around the SCP Foundation. So with that being said, I hope you guys all enjoyed this reaction. If you guys did, please smash that like button, smash that sub button, and hit that bell so you can stay plugged for each and every upload. And unfortunately, that concludes today's episode. However, I'll catch you guys on the next one.